And we isolate ourselves with gadgets and diversions, and we're encouraged to chase after things that don't last, and we have trouble distinguishing what is true from what is false, and we succumb to those voices that find it profitable to stoke anger and grievance. And even in resisting such voices, we so often find ourselves succumbing to cynicism or despair. What better time, then, to remember the life that Ethel Kennedy lived? What better time, then, to remember the life that Ethel Kennedy lived? A woman who understood that our salvation comes from turning towards each other, not turning away. Someone who reminds us by her example that life goes on no matter how deep the grief, that there is joy and purpose to be found, no matter what hand we've been dealt. That each of us has the power, if we so choose, to make our world a little better and to make somebody else's life a little better. And that we can have some fun and make some mischief in the process. What a gift. I sure did love Ethel Kennedy. I miss her. I miss her smile, I miss her warmth, I miss her generosity, and I miss her grace. May God bless her, and may she rest in eternal peace.
I ask Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi to come forward.
Again, Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President. How perfect for Ethel to have three great presidents of the United States speak at her service. We all know that the passing of Ethel Kennedy is a deep personal loss for her beloved family and her many friends, but also a profound loss, official loss for our country. So I'm honored and grateful for the opportunity to share some thoughts about Ethel from an official standpoint, but also from a girlfriend standpoint. I loved Ethel. As we all know, after the tragic loss of Bobby, Ethel moved forward with grace and dignity and a profound dedication to carrying out not just their entire commitment to expanding opportunity, promoting civil rights, and building a more peaceful world. Ethel and I talk frequently about hope, because people would say, where is hope? Well, we all know that Ethel's deep faith, and we said hope is sitting where it always has been, right between faith and charity. Ethel's deep faith in God and in goodness of others, her faith in the charity of others gave her hope and gave the rest of us hope as well. And she gave us strength to help America cope with a shared loss as she channeled her energies into establishing the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights, which she carried on for more than 56 years, The center has educated and inspired leaders, activists, and students to transform their communities and expand the blessings of peace. Ethel's lifetime of service was a model to the nation, and for it she was honored the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Thank you, President Obama, for that recognition. President Obama talked about when he first met Ethel. I met her maybe 60-some years before that. In 1960, when my father was just fresh out of being the mayor of Baltimore and a chair of the JFK campaign for President of the United States, the first event that we had was a tea to welcome the Kennedy ladies to Maryland. Now, my father was a politician. He was the mayor. He was an important guy. But for that, he became the person putting on the tea. That for the Kennedy ladies, it would have an abundance of flowers, the perfect food, the greatest music, and all the rest, because he saw this as such a great honor for Baltimore to welcome them. The imprimatur that Ethel gave him that day just meant everything to him. So that's how we met her, through her kindness. Her political savviness, yes, but her kindness. He was determined that it would be just a spectacular event, a model for the rest of the nation. She assured him that it would be. Over the years, I saw her humor and her communication skills. You all know that she was a great writer, storyteller, and quite a funny person, in addition to being a person of great faith. Ethel's 90th birthday party, some of you were there, in Florida, was like a Sweet 16 party. It was so much fun. The guest of honor was so beautiful, so full of joy and all the rest. And everything that we talked about was about what we were going to be doing next for a long time to come at this Sweet 16 party. We shared some stories about Ethel. One that some of you may have heard was in 1979, now this is before even I am in Congress, Larry Bird was signed by the Celtics, French Lick, Indiana, signed by the Celtics, and Ethel was asked to have a dinner for him in Hyannisport. Kids remember this? So Paul invited Vince Wolfington and Paul, because they're basketball players. You know basketball come to the dinner. Alicia Wolfington was assigned to cut the dinner because Larry had his hand bandaged. Oh, you know what it would be like a table full of Kennedys and sports fans, and it was raucous and it was noisy. And then all of a sudden, a very uncommon thing happened at that Kennedy table. There was a lull in the conversation. And at that lull, we hear Ethel, the mother in Ethel, proclaim, "So Larry, tell us, what role did your mother play in your basketball success?" What? As usual, she was a mother first, and that's what we know of her. Another was, and forgive me, Excellencies and priests, but this is the story that Ethel told, and in her great storytelling. Another was when Artie Buchwald was going to be the godfather of one of the children, and they were at church, and he was at the altar, and then Ethel told us that all of a sudden he went to the back of the church, and people were like, "Oh my gosh," and she went back and said, "Artie, are you okay? Is everything okay? Why did you leave the altar?" He said, "Oh, I'm okay. I'm just not sure I'm ready to renounce Satan and all of his works and all of his pomps." He did resume his responsibilities, a Jewish godfather, but nonetheless. Ethel enjoyed her politics, we know that. And each year, until recently, Joe and other family members, his father and the rest, we would join Ethel for an event in Hyannisport. And it was always spectacular. So everybody wanted to be there to be with Ethel. And part of it is we would go sailing. And we'd go sailing, and go out pretty far. Weather would change in the course of the day. It would get cold and windy and this or that. Then when we came in, we'd be like so relieved. We were freezing cold and all wet and the rest. She saw us get off the boats, and then she went out again. And then she went out again. You know that, kids. You know that story. How could she just, and this was later in life. She was a national treasure. We all know that. This remarkable, remarkable woman, and a matriarch of a great family. The breadth of her advocacy, depth of her compassion, the legacy of resilience and hope is such an inspiration. Since we're in the St. Matthew's, she was the personification of the Gospel of Matthew. Not that one, a different one. Not when I was hungry, that too. But the one I'm quoting now is Matthew 7, verse 11. This is Ethel, being very biblical. Ask and you shall receive. Seek and you shall find. Knock and the door will be open to you. Now, wasn't that the secret of her success for all of her charities and all of her priorities? Some knocking she did in California. She came and had Red Fay start the RFK tennis tournament there. Paul was part of that as well. It soon became, as time went by, the golf tournament. But Ethel came, she played, she was a star, she was remarkable. So in every way, she not only had the ideas, the intellectual resource, she not only had a strategy about how to get things done, she fully participated in every way. Ethel's faith and fortitude and determination inspired all who had the opportunity to know her. It was the secret of her success, although I don't know that it was much of a secret. I began with my father, because my brother was a big supporter of Bobby. We had a whole family tradition over all those years. I began with my father. I'll close with my mother, who wrote of mothers. Motherhood has its overtones in all languages. Like magic, it weaves a pattern full of joy, tears, patience, love, each exalting like music of golden bells. She went on to say, my mom did, to try to explain, we must listen to our hearts as well as our minds. Ethel understood this better than anyone. To the grandchildren and great-grandchildren family, the path for a lifetime, for many years for me, of 6.5 decades, almost 7 decades, we prayed with Ethel. That was part of the relationship. We prayed with Ethel. When we heard the news of her episode, and last Thursday, whenever, we prayed for Ethel. And now, children, we pray to Ethel. We pray to Ethel. God truly blessed her family in America with her faithfulness. We will never see her like again. This was an extraordinary, special God-given person to us. As we pray to her, when we pray to God, that she may rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. It is now my honor to ask President Clinton to come forward to deliver some remembrances. Mr. President.
Father McMillan, Joe, To all the Kennedy family, President Obama, thank you for what you said. Speaker Pelosi, Kathleen, it's the first time I ever heard Kenny Chesney sing a cappella. It was beautiful. Thank you, Martin. To all of you who are gathered here, I was trying to think of whether I could say anything that would add to what others have said. And I doubt that I can, but I will tell you this. I thought your mother was the cat's meow. She would flirt with me in the most innocent ways. I remember once I said, you know, we're not at replacement population anymore, and all the politics are anti-immigrant. What are we going to do? I said, we need more people like you. 11 kids times a couple of 100,000, and we're back in business. And she said, no, that's not a good idea. You can't do this unless you really want to. So I say, first of all, she really wanted to be your mothers, your grandmothers, your mother-in-laws, your great-grandmothers. And she was an amazing fireball of continuous energy. It was wonderful to be around her. I remember I loved all these Valentine cards. There's a bunch of them downstairs, and they're very political. I've got one with President Biden, one with President Obama, one with me. She covered the waterfront. But they're wonderful. And I think my favorite one had about 60 pictures of all of you, various family members, all cut out with small heart shapes. And it was always, all of them always had a little poem, you know, around it. So I kept looking at it and looking at it, and let's see, I've actually got a picture of it here. I asked for it, but I love the little poem. Roses are red, violets are blue. I'm surrounded by love, but there's still room for you. I think that's the way she made us all feel. There was still room, that there is an incredible capacity to expand. I love listening to the speaker talk about her experiences with her. You just had the feeling that, you know, nobody should be this upbeat, having been through everything she has. And yet she is. She is totally on the level. In a cynical, divided world where it seems like we all waste too much time with people trying to play us or being played, she was on the level. Day in and day out, person in and person out, always making you feel like you made a difference. I remember back in 2000, right as I was leaving the White House, Hillary had been elected to the Senate, to the same seat that Robert Kennedy had occupied as a senator from New York. So Ethel called me and said if I needed any instruction in how to be a Senate spouse from New York, she'd be happy to provide it free of charge. Then, when we moved into this old farmhouse, it's about 125 years old now, she gave me this amazing gift, a letter signed by George Clinton, who served in 2 stints as governor of New York for 21 years. We were not related, but it was she knew what the deal was. So, and in between, he was vice president. And there's this amazing letter. So I hung it up at the entryway to our house. And people say, where in the world did you get that? And I said, oh, Ethel Kennedy gave it to me. She said it was part of her husband's collection. So I may be the only person who actually got a training certificate in how to be a Senate spouse from New York, from Ethel Kennedy. I can't even begin to say how grateful I am that she lived to be 96 and that she had her energy and her brain power and her love power right through. I can't, and it would be wrong to, dredge up every memory, but I'm telling you, I never saw her. Even on sad occasions when we observed anniversaries of her husband's death, I never saw her when she didn't have her game face on, even when her heart was heavy. I think the lesson of those 96 years and all those children and all those grandchildren, all those great-grandchildren is that the God she worshiped wanted all of us to be more other-directed, to think more about how our words impacted other people, how our deeds impacted other people, how our lives showed what we were for or against. I wanted to say that every time I think of her, I've thought of her ever since she passed. I think she is the embodiment of the definition of love that St. Paul wrote about in 1 Corinthians, not romantic love, but agape, love for your fellow human beings. The total immersion in the wonder that every human life possesses. And she did it naturally, you think. But when you get hit as many times by life's blows as she did, it's a discipline. You have to decide whether you will keep your heart open or shut it down, whether you'll still keep reaching out to people or clench your fist, whether you dare trust and dare love one more time. for almost a full century. She kept giving it a try. There was always one more time. But there's still room for you. Think about how we live. Think about how we think. Think about what we say about each other, especially now in this political season. Think about Ethel. There's still room for you. We got to clear the room now. It's our job. Thank you. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for being Hillary's friend. Thank you for caring. Thank you for the family you built and the untold families you inspired. The good Lord knows if anybody ever deserves a quality escort to the pearly gates, it's you. God bless you. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Rory to come forward and give some remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, President Obama, President Clinton, President Biden. We're so honored for you all to be here. Thank you, Nancy Pelosi. She was such a huge fan. She had a crush on you three, and she loved you, Nancy, for so many decades. And I can say the same about Kenny and Sting. Thank you all. It's a great honor. Mommy was all I ever had, but I have to say, to me, she was more, so much more than I could ever have hoped for. As her youngest child, the 11th, I know that for her, my birth into this world was bittersweet. She told me this. I asked her, only once, I asked her during the making of my documentary, Ethel. Of course, it's sad to think of your arrival as being anything less than pure joy. But I understood what Mom was saying, that mixed into the joy, the sweetness, was her awareness that my father would not get to meet me, to hold me, that he was truly gone. And so for my mother and me, it was just us. But then I know for my other 10 brothers and sisters, for Douglas, who was 1, up to Kathleen, already 16, for them too, it had become just us, all of us, and Mommy. We were in it together. It must have been a lot, I imagine, for a 40-year-old widow to carry, a lot for anyone. Yet here today, looking back, what a thrilling, fun, funny, meaningful, what a deeply loving journey it has been. One of the greatest gifts from my mother was her commitment to me. She was my staunchest advocate. To have a parent believe in you so completely, without hesitation, for always and forever, to have her believe so fully in your potential, to feel her in your corner. As a young teenager, I remember in high school, I was maybe 14, and there was much in the news about apartheid, abhorrent and upsetting, with protesters getting arrested outside the South African embassy on a daily basis. It was on a school night, I think, my brother Douglas and I had been watching the nightly news reports, and we looked at each other and said, "Let's get arrested." Of course, having said this, we didn't quite know how to accomplish this task. We were nervous telling Mom, but we marched into her bedroom and announced, "We want to get arrested to protest apartheid." My mother looked back up at us, and without missing a beat, she said, "Great, I'll drive." So we piled into an old convertible and we drove down to the embassy. And Douglas and I indeed were arrested. We were handcuffed, and I, being the only girl, I was shoved by myself into a separate squad car. I remember feeling my heart in my throat, the metal cuffs on my wrists, the streets outside getting dark. And then I looked up, this terrified teenager, to find my mother standing there by the side of the car staring down at me with just the biggest, widest smile on her face. She could not have been more proud. But now you see, as a young child, I actually thought it was just me, that Mom believed in just me, that I was special. But what I came to understand was that to Mom, all my siblings were special, that she believed in all of us, and in my father too. Earlier, I mentioned my documentary, Ethel. In making that film and examining my mother's life and interviewing her and all my siblings, if I could point to one lesson, one discovery, I learned what a central role Mom played in all that my father accomplished, in all that he became. To a large extent, that was because she believed in him. She was in his corner. She was his staunchest advocate. Historian Arthur Schlesinger wrote about my parents' relationship. For Robert Kennedy, it was the best thing that could have happened. He never had to prove himself to her. Ethel gave him unquestioning confidence, unwavering direction, unstinted love. And I think that is true, that her support, her love, lifted him up. And that was truly one of her superpowers. Because if you met my mother, you couldn't help but fall under her spell. And that's because my mother loved people, she believed in people, in everyone's innate potential. This included inner city communities in